Change of the Qibla. The Prophet, as well as the Muslims, had been facing Jerusalem while worshipping, that is, they regarded it as housing the Qibla. This practice was followed for 1 year and 4 months after migrating to Medina. It was the Prophet's desire that the Kaaba be made the Qibla for prayers, as did the other Arab converts to Islam, for they had been holding the sanctuary at Mecca in a reverential regard since time immemorial. To them the house of worship built by Ibrahim and Ismail was the holiest of the holy ones, incomparable in sanctity to any other sanctum or shrine. They were put to a severe test by being asked to face Jerusalem instead of the Kaaba, and they withstood this trial by dutifully obeying the divine command. Such was their devotion to the Prophet, that they always replied, whether they found anything to their liking or not, "We hear, and we obey," Quran 2400 hours 51. And, "We believe therein, the whole is from our Lord," Quran 3:7. Thus, after the faith of the earliest Muslims had been brought to a test and they had defied it successfully, the Qibla for the prayer was changed to the Kaaba. "Thus we have appointed you a middle nation, that ye may be witness against mankind, and that the messenger may be witness against you. And we appointed the Qibla which you formerly observed only that we might know him who followeth the messenger, from him who turneth on his heels. In truth it was a hard test, save for those whom Allah guided." Quran 2:143. The Muslims changed their direction promptly in prayer, in compliance with divine command, towards the Kaaba, which was henceforth selected as the Qibla for all the believers, living in any part of the world, for all times to come. The Jews lash out against the Muslims. It preyed upon the minds of the Jews that Islam had established itself in Medina and was making rapid strides day after day. They were sane enough to realize that if the popularity of Islam continued unabated for an extended period of time, it would be difficult for them to stand up against their potential enemies. So they decided to put up a front against the Muslims and launched a campaign to slight, vilify and ridicule them. The Muslims were, however, not permitted to return the tirades hurled against them. They were commanded to be patient and forbearing, as evidenced by the Quranic verse that says, "Withhold your hands, establish worship," Quran 4 hours 77 minutes. Such was the code of behavior enjoined upon them, so that they might learn to disdain the world and its pleasures, become self-denying, get prepared to make nobler sacrifices, experiencing in the end obedience to Allah's commands. Permission to fight. The Muslims gradually amassed power and became strong enough to fight against their enemies. They were first told to resist aggression and then later on permitted to fight against the mischievous ones. But it was only a permission rather than an obligation to take up arms against the enemies. Sanction is given unto those who fight because they have been wronged, and Allah is indeed able to give them victory. Quran 22:39. Expedition of Abwa and Abdullah bin Jahsh. In pursuance of the command given by Allah, the Prophet started sending out small expeditions to discourage hostile tribes. These expeditions were not meant to launch out any attack against the enemy but simply to frighten people hostile to Islam by way of a show of force. We shall mention here one of the earliest expeditions, led by Abdullah bin Jahsh, for it embodied a revelation sent down by Allah which shows that Islam does not countenance the least excesses or high-handedness even from its own followers. Islam is always fair and impartial, without any regard to persons or parties, in bringing up its verdict on every affair. The Prophet sent Abdullah bin Jahsh on an expedition with 8 emigrants during the month of Rajab 2 He gave him a letter with the instruction that he was not to read it until he had journeyed for 2 days, and then act according to the directions contained therein by leaving his companions the decision to remain with him or turn back of their own choice. So, Abdullah bin Jahsh read the letter after having traveled for 2 days. The instruction contained in it was, when you have read this letter, proceed to the oasis of Nakhla between Makkah and Taif. Install your tents there to find out the movements of the Quraysh and send the information to us. Having gone through the letter, Abdullah bin Jahsh said, "We hear, and we obey," and then he said to his companions, "The Prophet of Allah has ordered me to lie in waiting at the oasis on the road between Makkah and Taif and watch the movements of the Quraysh so as to deliver news for him, but he has also asked me not to compel any one of you to follow me. If anyone wishes martyrdom, he may come with me, and whoever wishes against it may go back, for I have abide by the instructions of the Prophet." Then he went ahead, and so did all of his comrades, with none of them falling out. The party moved on to the particular oasis where they camped. In a short while, a caravan of the Quraysh that included Amir bin al-Hadrami passed by them. When the Qurayshites saw the party encamped near them they got frightened, but after seeing Ukasha whose head was shaved, their suspicions vanished, for they regarded the party as pilgrims. They said, "Nothing to fear from them, they are pilgrims." That was the last day of Rajab. The Muslim party on the other hand deliberated among themselves and decided that if they left the Qurayshites alone that night, they would get into the sacred area and obstruct their entry there, but if they fight them, they would be devaluing the sacred month by instituting a bloody confrontation. At first they felt hesitant as well as dismayed, but ultimately made up their mind to kill as many of the Quraysh as possible and plunder as much of their goods as they could. Waqid bin Abdullah at-Tamimi shot the first arrow, killing Amr bin al-Hadrami, while his companions captured 2 of the Qurayshites. Abdullah bin Yash and his companions returned to Medina with their captives. When Abdullah bin Yash and his companions reported the incident to the Prophet, he said, "I did not ask you to fight in the sacred month, nor seize the caravans and take captives." The Prophet refused to accept the spoils brought to him by the transgressing group. The campaigners were worried and fearfully apprehensive of being doomed. Besides, the other Muslims also harshly reproached them for what they had done. At the same time, Quraysh laid a charge, saying, "Lo! Muhammad has allowed war and bloodshed in the sacred months." It was on this occasion that Allah sent down the revelation to the Prophet. They question thee, O Muhammad, with regard to warfare in the sacred month. Say, warfare therein is a great transgression, but turn men from a way of Allah, and to expel the people thence, is greater sin with Allah, for persecution is worse than killing. Quran 2:217. Ibn Qayyim writes about the meaning of this verse in Zad al-Ma'ad, Allah has given a fair deal to his friends as well as foes, for he has not commended the sin of fighting in the sacred month that was committed by his pious and devout servants. Allah has held it to be a serious act of transgression. At the same time, he reminds the idolaters that they have been guilty of even greater sins through their acts of persecution in the sacred city of Mecca, and thus they still deserve more condemnation and punishment. Since, however, the believing servants of Allah had been guilty of indiscretion or that they had committed a mistake, Allah has lent them a hope. He had given them hope that they might be forgiven on account of their faith in the unity of Allah, submission to Him, migration with the Prophet, and their sacrifices towards His way. Fasting made obligatory. When the Muslims had taken prayer as a mark and symbol of their faith, it had been indelibly ingrained in their hearts and souls. Then it was, in the 2nd year of Hijrah, that Allah commanded them to also observe fasting, hence, O who believe! Fasting is prescribed for you, even as it was prescribed for those before you, that may ward off evil. Quran 2:183. In another verse, the Quran says, "The month of Ramadan in which was revealed the Quran, a guidance for mankind, and clear proofs of the guidance, and the criterion, of right and wrong. And whosoever of you sights the crescent, let him fast the month." Quran 2:185. Decisive Battle of Badr. The circumstances that led to this battle began with the news received by the Prophet, that a great caravan with lots of money and merchandise, was being led by Abu Sufyan on its way back to Mecca from Syria. A state of belligerence already existed between the Muslims and the Quraysh, for the Quraysh was by this time doing all that was in their power to harm and abuse the Muslims, to impede their progress, and to topple their rising power. They were sparing none of their financial and physical resources to get on the job, and their armed detachments very often penetrated deep into the limits of Medina and its pastures to pound upon the Muslims. As we may know that the Muhajirun have left all their houses and most of their wealth back in Mecca, and as a result of that this was a good reason to capture this caravan. The Prophet asked the Muslims to get ready to intercept the caravan. However, since it was a commercial caravan, the Prophet did not make any elaborate arrangements for fighting, but merely positioned himself in order to catch the caravan flat-footed. Informed of the Prophet's decision to stop him, Abu Sufyan sent a courier to Mecca with an urgent request for reinforcements. Thereupon, the Quraysh, ably supported and accompanied by all the notable chiefs of Mecca, hastily formed an armed force. Such support group enlisted every man available therein from the neighboring tribes, and this army went forth to assist the caravan. The Quraysh were so flared up that hardly a man was left behind in Mecca. News came to the Prophet that a strong Meccan army was on its way to engage him in a battle. The Prophet thereupon summoned his followers and solicited for their advice. He really wanted to ascertain the reaction of the Ansars, for their original oath of allegiance with him obliged them to defend him in Medina and did not compel them to take part in a military expedition outside their territory. The Muhajirun responded first and assured him of their help and loyalty. The Prophet, however, repeated his appeal and the Muhajirun gave similar reply, but the Prophet threw the same question once again for the third time. Now the Ansar realized that the question was meant for them. Sa'd bin Mu'adh immediately got up to say in reply, "O Prophet of God, it appears that the question is directed to us and you want to have our answer. Perhaps you think, O Prophet of God, that the Ansar have offered to help you on their own territory only. I want to tell you in behalf of the Ansar that you may lead us wherever you like, align with whom you may desire or break relations with whom you may think fit. You may take whatever you desire from our property and give us as much as you want, for whatever you would take from our property would be dearer to us than what you would leave for us. We will follow whatever you command us to do. By God, if you go ahead until you reach Bark Gimdan, we will accompany you, and by God if you march into the sea, we will also do it with you." The battle took place on the 17th of Ramadan, second year of Hijrah. Badr is situated 160 kilometers southwest of Medina. The battle was between the Muslims as one side and Quraysh idolaters, where the Muslims' army were consisting of 313 to 317 men with 2 horses and 70 camels. On the contrary, Quraysh army were consisting of 1,000 men with 100 horses, 600 suits of armor, and many camels. 70 men were killed among the Qurayshi's army, and 70 were captured, where only 14 of the Muslims were killed. The result of the battle was a great victory for the Muslims over their enemy. Other expeditions. The ironclad oath of Abu Sufyan, as mentioned earlier, bound him to refrain from even splashing water over his head until he had wreaked havoc on the Muslims. The chief of the Jewish tribe of Bani an-Nadir, who offered the information he desired about Medina. Thereupon Abu Sufyan succeeded in getting away after killing 2 of the Ansars. The Prophet got a warning of the evil raiders and went out in their pursuit. Abu Sufyan eluded the Prophet, but was obliged to throw away a good deal of his provisions consisting of food grains, especially parched corn or alsaic, and hence the expedition goes by such a name. The Jews of Medina who first broke their covenant with the Prophet were Banu Qaynuqa. They contended with the Muslims and spoke scornfully of the Prophet. Ultimately, the Prophet besieged them, the siege lasting for 15 nights, until Banu Qaynuqa surrendered unconditionally. The attack had been instigated on the recommendation of Abdullah bin Ubay, the leader of the hypocrites. Banu Qaynuqa operated a market in Medina and practiced crafts such as that of the goldsmith trade. They were forced to abandon the city although the number of people who could bear arms among them was 700.